Welcome to the Minerva Mysteries. Adventure 1. The King Under the City. Written by Malcolm Harris. Art by Dottie Wong. The thing about magic, what most people forget, is that it doesn't care if you believe in it or not. Many times, I've heard people say, "I don't believe in that mumbo-jumbo," or "that's all smoke and mirrors," right before magic changes their life forever. Case in point. I was with my boyfriend Oliver, cleaning up a particularly horrible mess on Broadway. It seems one of those people who dress up in costumes to fleece tourists by taking pictures with them made the mistake of not watching where they were going and fell through a manhole cover. Normally, in that case, you would have someone going to the hospital or, at worst, vanishing, never to be seen again because their body was washed out into the harbor. But magic stepped in. The person was dressed as an iconic mouse from a particularly iconic entertainment company. That mouse was beloved by so many and a source of greed and avarice. That kind of belief and power attracts magic just as much as a dead body with a half-eaten hoagie in its pocket attracts rats. Rats that are legendary in the sewer, rats that can attract magic on their own to grow larger and smarter. The situation quickly became a potent mixture of metaphysical fuckery, resulting over time in a new rat king, a hive mind of almost 100 rats, wearing the decaying, half-eaten flesh of a hapless huckster and the icon of billions. MIC, see you real soon, KEY, why? Because you taste good, and it's going to eat you. This is going to make my therapist a very rich man, Oliver remarked as he dragged the half-eaten corpse of a young woman from under a dumpster. She appeared to be a tourist based on her clothing. I could tell by the smell and the magic I sensed, an intense blend of necrotic energy, natural energy, and zeitgeist, that we were dealing with a rat king. The small bites only confirmed my metaphysical forensics. "It's just a rat king, we've dealt with them before," I replied, trying not to let my bravado feed into the magic of the area and inflate the danger of the situation. Oliver nodded thoughtfully. "So, do we leave her here? Whoever she is, she might have family who want to know she's not coming home." He looked at me with understanding. He knew I was practical in such situations, and my first instinct would be to vaporize the body with a snap of my fingers and be done with it. But Oliver, being a musician, a romantic, and a poet at heart, thought about the young woman and those who loved her. "We'll clean the area, and I'll have Mavis send an anonymous call to the NYPD," I said, before casting a spell to remove any signs of our presence and the Rat Kings. This was part of my job. As the head witch of the greater Manhattan Island area, it was not only my responsibility to keep track of all things magical but also to shield the millions of Mundies in the area from these supernatural occurrences. For those unfamiliar, a Mundi or mundane is a non-magical person whose lives are consumed by the minutiae of media, trends, and a world they believe they understand. "What's going on here?" a gruff voice echoed down the alley. I turned to see two policemen in full bike cop attire walking towards us. "Nothing, officer," said Oliver quickly, moving to my side and blocking the view of the body, which my magic had already concealed the smell of. "We're just a bit lost," I replied, calling upon an exaggerated version of my Iowan accent, which I had tried my best to shed since coming to the city. I knew that due to our skin color and the fact that we appeared relatively affluent, there was a good chance they would leave us alone. It was a harsh truth that I despised, but racism was a stark reality, especially when dealing with law enforcement. "Well, you folks need to be careful. I know things may seem better, but there are still all sorts of undesirables lurking around that might harm good folks like you," the policeman warned. The other officer nodded in agreement and added, "Yeah, the big city attracts good people like us and, you know, the other sort who bring down our property values." Oliver squeezed my hand as they spoke. He understood me well enough to know that talk like that tended to bring out the worst in me. I was born in Iowa to farmers, in a city where no one had ever had Chinese food, where the only black family in town was called the Spookies behind their backs, and where the two gay kids in school were subjected to daily beatings. It was Middle America at its finest. As an outcast and someone who saw the injustice in the world, I had done my best to fight back and expose the bigoted nature of those who believed they were superior to those who looked and acted differently, despite the fact that we were all on the same sinking ship of trickle-down economics. Of course, my efforts hadn't worked, and as soon as I graduated at the age of 16, I packed my things, gave Diggle, Iowa, the finger, and headed east. I looked at Oliver and furrowed my brow. A part of me wanted to let their words go uncontested, to let them go about their lives so I could focus on my job, finding the Rat King and dealing with it before it killed any more people, tourists or otherwise. But another part of me knew that people like those policemen, people with that kind of power, were a danger. Maybe not to the tourists of the area, but to some of the people who called my city home. They might decide a kid in Harlem in a hoodie reaching into his pocket for candy is reaching for a gun, or that a girl in Chinatown who got raped had it coming, simply because of their biases. Minnie, no, whispered Oliver, hoping his nickname for me would calm me as I slipped my hand from his. You know, it's assholes like you that make people like me think humanity has had its day, I said. The policeman closest to me had eyes that widened, that confused look people tend to get right before their view of reality, their very belief, their very forms are torn apart. Magic, at its most simple, is all about energies. The magic in all things is the bits of unused energy from the creation of all things. My sister witches and I can tap into that energy in things, control it to change creation and to create. We also, in our own way, create that energy ourselves, which is why the more witches in an area, the more that area's ambient energy grows. Greater Manhattan area has 20 witches in it, feeding the ley lines of the city that never sleeps. Add in the various magical beliefs brought in by various cultures, bringing their own fuel into the mix, and you'll start to understand why my job is so important. But what I did next wasn't so much important as it was a pleasure. As the cops listened to my words, I raised a hand and snapped a finger. The man closest to me eyes bulged, his body twisted and contorted, steam poured from his mouth and pores as the excess mass of his body, clothing, guns, and all, hissed away into the air, and he turned into a rat in an instant. What the hell? Said his friend, his mind trying to grasp what he had seen. People tend to have 3 reactions the first time they see real magic. 1, they stand there denying what they just saw, thinking it's a trick or a stunt for an internet channel. I've heard it described as an existential stroke. 2, they embrace their primal instincts and run. Like the first caveman to see one of their first witches, they turn and flee, their minds unable to grasp the incredible. And if you're lucky, you get to see a full-grown man piss himself. 3, and this is the rare one. Years of religious zealotry, fight over flight, or idiocy build up in them, and they attack. Yeah, I know a lot of people think this is what they would do, but trust me, most people tend to choose number 1 or 2, no matter how big and bad they think they are. What just happened? Asked the other policeman, his leg wet with fear, his mind obviously trying to grasp ideas he wasn't ready to accept. I turned your buddy into a rat, I said matter-of-factly. Now what happens to you depends on 2 things, I continued. What things? He said as his hand shook, too afraid to reach for his gun, and his eyes darted around. Did you guys turn on your chest cameras before riding up to see what this good white couple was doing? I asked. No, we thought. He stammered, slowly taking a step back but too weak in the knees to run. 2, I continued, the thing we hunted calls to his kind. So while 1 rat may do, maybe 2 rats would be better. My voice showed the slight amusement I was feeling at the situation. I have a wife, kids, begged the cop. Come on, babe, the guy might be trash, but no one is going to believe him, chimed in Oliver. As I watched the remaining policemen look at me with fearful eyes, my mind wandered, reflecting on the aftermath of exposing magic to the uninitiated. The human mind, I knew, had a knack for rationalizing the inexplicable, often bending the experience to fit a mundane worldview. That was the best outcome I could hope for regarding the cop. However, there was another possibility. His psyche might shatter under the weight of the supernatural, causing him to shut down completely or, even worse, harm himself or others as he descended into a world of online conspiracy theories about real witches. I turned my attention to Oliver, my partner in both life and my fight against the evils that plagued my city. He had witnessed countless moments like this and knew how to temper my sometimes less than benevolent impulses. I rolled my eyes and gestured toward the transformed rat cop, casting a spell that would make his skin and clothes reek of cheap booze for the next week. It wasn't an act of malice, but a necessary precaution. I could have easily erased the events from his memory, but I believed there was a better chance that, with the state he was in and the story he'd tell, he would be temporarily removed from duty. This would give his family a chance to intervene, either to commit him or help him escape from the escalating madness. "Fine," I said with a tone that carried both authority and threat. "Shoo, and if I so much as hear anything about this from a stray spirit or come across an online post, I'll find you and turn your ass into a block of cheese." The policeman fled with a near-frenzied urgency, stumbling as he mounted his bike and rode off, leaving a cacophony of blaring car horns in his wake. Oliver, always the voice of reason, chimed in, "See, you don't always have to zap first and ask questions later." I couldn't resist a playful retort, "Don't make me melt you," before I walked over to the still stunned rat and picked it up by the tail. Transformations were a tricky business, a constant battle between retaining one's humanity and succumbing to the primal, animalistic instincts. The animal mind, I knew, always won in the end. But sometimes, it took a few hours or even a day or two, a luxury I didn't have. "I need you to find your king," I whispered to the rat, infusing my words with a touch of magic to guide it. Placing the rat down, I watched it scurry away, all while casting a tracking spell on it. Turning to my trusty smartphone, I issued another command. "Mavis, check for body cam and report footage in the vicinity of where I am. Also, report a body found in this alley in exactly 2 hours." With the digital side of things handled, I turned to Oliver with a determined look and quipped, "Time to commit rat regicide." Finding the Rat King wasn't hard. The rat, as I knew it would, sensed a pull towards the Rat King it couldn't resist, a primal, irresistible force that made it ignore everything else. And that was the problem. In the middle of a big city, there were 100 ways a rat could meet its end, and it was my job to ensure that didn't happen. So, Oliver and I followed the creature from Midtown towards the harbor. Normally, I wouldn't hesitate to cast a dozen or so minor spells to halt traffic or prevent a sadistic pizza restaurant employee from harming a defenseless animal. However, such spells, even though small, consumed energy, and I had no idea how much energy I would need to deal with the creature we sought. After a few hours on foot, we arrived at a small storage shed behind a parking lot. The rat we were chasing had crawled in under the door. "Why can't magic monsters ever live in nice places?" complained Oliver. "Because a lot of the human monsters already live there," I replied. To conserve magical energy, I stepped aside, allowing Oliver to pick the lock. Since we started dating and he began assisting me, he had acquired more than a few skills that a kid from Long Island running from parents with hefty bank accounts didn't typically possess. Lock picking, firearm use, sneaking around, and effective lying had become part of his skill set. Once the door opened, we entered and found a hole that reeked of death and decay in the middle of the shed, leading down into darkness. The hard-packed dirt slope, though steep, wasn't difficult to traverse, especially with both of us using our phones as flashlights. The hole-turned tunnel descended approximately 20 feet before transitioning from vertical to horizontal, eventually breaking through a wall into what appeared to be an abandoned subway station. "I see my tax money is paying for absolutely nothing," I remarked as I stepped into the dim open area with stone walls and an arched ceiling. Against one wall, dozens of old barrels and an unused bar, complete with a beer tap, stood in silence. "I think we've found a speakeasy," Oliver said. I nodded in agreement. The city was dotted with these remnants from Prohibition days. While most people might be excited by the discovery of such a place, I saw it as less a place of amusement and more of a refuge where creatures that feared daylight hid. Holding out my hand, I began to focus. I knew that if the creature was nearby, I could feel it, or at the very least, the stalking rodent I had enchanted. From my perspective, as I searched, the world transformed into more than just an empty old speakeasy. It became a convergence of spirits from the time when indigenous people inhabited the area, now starving from lack of recognition, and the ghosts of those who died building the area. Additionally, there were creatures spawned that were feeding on the hate and vexation of the city above. It was a deluge of beings that normal humans couldn't perceive or comprehend. "Someone's casting detect magic," my boyfriend remarked. He glanced at me while checking his gold .50 caliber pistol, a gift from me, forged by an artificer witch friend using a feather from an angel I had assisted about a year and a half ago. That celestial had come from another corner of the multiverse, hunting a wayward cherub who had become attached to a small child. The cherub had acted as an imaginary friend and, while well-intentioned, had ended up doing some less than angelic deeds. "Don't drag me into your nerd world," I muttered as I sifted through the spirits, ghosts, and imps. "Feed," 1,000 tiny rodent voices whispered in unison. "Feed the king." I opened my eyes just as a 6-foot creature made up of 100 rats, wearing the face of Steamboat Willie, emerged from the darkness on all fours. Tiny tails and mouths bulged through the seams of the creature's form. Hi ho," said Oliver, firing, driven by macho bravado, but the blessed bullets only tore through the costume, killing a handful of rats and doing nothing to stop the creature. "You hurt me, I kill you," declared the Rat King, now standing at its full height. Rats stuck together by their tails, blood, feces, and hair spilled partially out, forming a writhing cape and crown. "I think I'm going to be sick," Oliver muttered as I stepped forward and fired a bolt of green energy from my finger at the creature, but it shifted its form to avoid the attack. "Die before your king," it taunted, still speaking in the collective voice of many tiny rats. "That's unexpected," I remarked to Oliver, who was reloading his gun. To my surprise, the Rat King had grown smarter than expected, which meant we had to be smarter too. Unlike humans, magical beings were somewhat resistant to spellcasting, so I couldn't just turn it into cotton candy and hope for the best. Mind control was also out of the question, given the hive mind nature of the creature. My options were narrowing. I cast another spell, this time conjuring green, which fired behind the creature. The flames formed a wall, effectively blocking its retreat. "No burn," the creature growled, realizing that part of its cape was on fire and moving towards me. Meanwhile, Oliver kept firing his gun, but the bullets were only dividing the mass of rats. "Eat your flesh," it hissed, focusing its attention on my boyfriend. Seeing an opportunity, I cast another spell. Oliver began to glow and started to divide, or at least, he appeared to. Multiple images of him sprung from his form, each one running in a different direction, drawing the creature's attention and pulling it in multiple directions until it began to fall apart into groups of a dozen or so, still stuck together in twisted squirming masses. "This is freaky," Oliver commented. "Before you ask, I'm not going to do it to myself while we're fucking," I quipped. Oliver looked crestfallen before using his remaining bullets on one of the clusters of rats, while I tossed balls of green flames at the others. "Was king," said the rats in a sad tone as they scattered, and the room filled with the smell of burning rodent flesh and hair. Which fire didn't need air and couldn't be extinguished by water or dirt. It burned until the magic that fueled it faded away, usually about 10 minutes. This meant that anything wooden and flammable in the path of the fleeing rats would also burn for that duration. "It's time to go," I told Oliver, who was already coughing from the smoke. "Good," he said, holstering his gun, turning on his phone's flashlight, and heading towards the way we came in. Once we were back in the shed, I cast a spell to seal the tunnel, turning the Rat King's den into an oven. Reaching out again, I focused on the creature's energy. It was scared, fragmented, and fading. "It's almost done," I said aloud, waiting for the last of the creature's energy to dissipate. "Are you hungry?" "I think I'm hungry," said Oliver. "Did we just have the same experience?" I replied sarcastically. Food was the furthest thing from my mind at that moment, as I felt relief wash over me knowing that the king was dead. "Yeah, and killing Mickey is making me crave Thai," said my boyfriend. I glared at him in the dim shed, making it clear that I was annoyed and that he was mere seconds away from spending the rest of the day as a gnat. After exiting the shed, Oliver took out a silver flask filled with water blessed by me, a priest, a rabbi, and a voodoo hogan, and emptied its contents on the door. My magic, combined with the beliefs of the followers of those religions, should be more than enough to keep the general area free of malevolent creatures for a few weeks, at least. or so we hoped. You see. Another thing about magic is that while I can wield it and make it do my bidding, it is inherently unpredictable when left to its own devices. Sometimes it can spawn holes to hell realms and bring nightmares to life, but other times, sadly rare times, it can bring miracles and dreams to life,